Hey everybody, welcome back to the Putnam. My name is Matt and thanks for joining us for another one of our Immerse videos. The subject of this one is going to be arrivals. So what we're going to do is hang out with our Curator of Natural Sciences, and she's going to do a presentation on invasive species. We're also going to spend some more time with Miss Lakin, our cool educator in the Fab Lab, and she's going to do an activity related to arrivals. We're going to start off by hanging out with our Curator of Anthropology and History, and she's going to do a cool piece on immigrants, human arrivals into the country. And I won't spoil that too much, I'm just going to let her take it away, so here you go. Enjoy.
Hi, I have an artifact here today that's going to talk about new arrivals to our community. In this case, it was the Mexican-American community. Now, the Mexican-American community arrived here in the Quad Cities during the very early 1900s. The 19-teens during World War I and after were times when a lot of people were immigrating to this area. Now imagine that you've come to a new place, you don't speak the language well, but yet you're becoming a citizen of that country and you want to be able to vote and to participate, as many of the new arrivals wanted to do. So in this case, this is the voting machine from 1940. Look at how complicated it is with buttons and gears and pull things. How do you use this thing? So imagine you're a new immigrant trying to make your first vote in your new country. A lot of them didn't know how to use it. One of the early Mexican-American immigrants was a man whose name was Porfirio Meyer. And he understood that his fellow Mexican-Americans were having trouble with this machine. So he got this piece here, which is like the type that they would be using in the polls, and took it around the Mexican-American community from house to house, showing them how to work this complicated machine so that they could do their citizenly duty and vote. So happily, this was a wonderful introduction to the new Mexican-American citizens here in the Quad Cities, and they were able to vote in 1940 for the presidential election, which was President Roosevelt as the incumbent, the person who was already in office, wanting to rerun again for the next 4 years, against his fellow politician who wanted to become president, Wendell Willkie, as well as the governor and the other elections that were taken that year as well too. So this is a great example of how immigrants can help each other, and more established citizens can help the newer citizens. So thank you very much for dropping into collection storage again so I could tell you this wonderful story.
Hi everyone, my name's Chris Chandler. I'm the Curator of Natural Science here at the Putnam. Today I'm going to talk about a version of arrivals that isn't always a good thing, and that's in nature. When you look at nature, new arrivals often in the form of plants and animals can cause a lot of problems in ecosystems that are already established. We're talking about animals that evolve with the plants around them, and so you have this nice little ecosystem that works very well. It's sort of like a well-oiled machine, and then you get this new arrival from somewhere else, and suddenly you've thrown a wrench in the machine and things can happen. So these newcomers, they also often lead to decline in native species, and they can actually, when it comes to certain groups, can actually destroy an ecosystem, which is something you really don't want to happen, because we like having lots of different types of ecosystems. So these new arrivals sometimes are termed invasive species, and to be an invasive species you have to meet two criteria. First of all, you have to come from somewhere else. You're not native. And the second criteria is that you have to cause harm. So not everything that comes over and lands here causes harm, but a lot of times they do. Invasive species don't actually have to come from another country. They can come from another part of your country. So in the US, things like lake trout from the Great Lakes are considered an invasive species in Yellowstone. They got into Yellowstone Lake out in Wyoming, and they're out competing the cutthroat trout that actually are native there. So they're considered an invasive species even though they're from North America. So the reason why invasive species cause harm, there's a number of reasons. The two biggest probably are that a lot of times they have no predators, nothing's there, nothing to eat them, and also the opposite of that is that other animals here have no protection from them. They haven't ever run into them before, so they have no idea what to do to not be eaten. They also, a lot of times, out-reproduce the native species, which is another problem. If you keep out-reproducing, you keep making more and more young, and they take up more of the resources, and you basically, use up all the resources, and the native species don't have any left. And probably a fourth thing that you consider sometimes is that sometimes it's not the actual animal that caused the problem, but something that's with the animal, or with the plant. They sometimes bring along diseases with them that, once again, native species don't have any resistance to, and then you've got another problem. They also, because of the way they act, and because they interact with the native species, you basically can break the chain, the web of the ecosystem, and basically cause declines in species and then pretty much destroy the ecosystem sometimes. I thought what we'd do is we talk about some common ones for our area, things that you might have heard about or know about that are talking about invasive species. Did you ever realize that house sparrows and starlings aren't native to North America? Both these birds were actually introduced in the 1800s. In 1852, the English house sparrow was introduced apparently it was supposed to eat a bunch of voracious caterpillars that were eating our elm trees. Obviously that didn't really work. And the European starling was actually brought in, a very strange setup. Apparently somebody wanted to introduce all the birds that appear in Shakespeare into Central Park in New York. Well, to introduce birds, they escape. Birds rarely stay in one place. That's what those wings are for, right? The problem with most of these birds is that they're generalist. They can eat almost anything, and they're really high producers, as in reproducing very quickly, and they're rather aggressive when it comes to our birds, to the native birds. So basically when you introduce these, our bluebirds and tree swallows and things like that took a major hit and are still taking a hit from them. Although there's some fun things about these guys. You can't help but love them sometimes. Especially the starling. I don't know if you realize, but starlings are wonderful mimics, and they can mimic something like 20 different bird species. So next time you hear a robin, you might want to look up and make sure it's actually a robin making that noise and not a starling. Other things that have come along with us, as opposed to being introduced on purpose, is our furry friends, rodents. Things like black rats and brown rats and the house mouse, that they all came with us. Wherever people go, the rats follow, I'm afraid to say. It's so sad. And that can lead to a huge problem if you live on an island, because you know how quickly rodents reproduce. They also pretty much eat anything, which means they'll eat lizards and little birds and bird eggs. And so like in places like Hawaii, rodents have caused major problems when it comes to native birds. They literally are eating themselves out of house and home when it comes to these guys. One of the major problems with these guys, of course, is that they reproduce really fast. So if you think about a house mouse, it can have something like 14 litters every year and have 5 to 6 babies in every litter. And if you do the math, that's like 70 offspring every year. And if you can think about how quickly they become adults and can reproduce, you can see how that exponentially grows, and you end up with this huge number of rodents, which is what we have now with problems like that. And finally, I thought I'd say something about something that's very Quad City for us. Is you guys have ever noticed how we have a lot of black squirrels around here? So black squirrels aren't native to this area. They are basically just a black morph of gray squirrels here. There's a lot of tales about how they got here, and one of the ones that you hear a lot is that B.J. Palmer's father, so B.J. Palmer is the gentleman who invented basically chiropractic science. His father, apparently, the story is that he got a couple of squirrels as payment for, a job well done, that sort of thing. And he made a deal with the commander at the arsenal to house them, and apparently the breeding pair escaped across the ice floes over to Davenport, and supposedly that's how we ended up with black squirrels here. You'll tend to see them more in cities because if you think about it, a black squirrel sticks out like a sore thumb when it comes to being in the winter and snow and things. So they tend to be more of a city folk than a country folk because they're much easier to spot in the wild, and so they probably don't survive as well when we got all the hawks and owls we do here. So, well, I hope you enjoyed learning a little about the invasive species that are a different type of arrival here in the Quad Cities and in this area.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Miss Lakin here at the Putnam. I am in the Putnam's Fab Lab. Today is all about arrivals. So today's activity, Immerse activity, is our arrivals activity. You can find this on our website also under the virtual learning tab. And I'm gonna walk you through it. So the first thing for this activity says, envision your own arrival. Imagine you're moving to a new country and can take a suitcase full of clothes and 5 other things with you. You must be able to carry each item by yourself. What would you take? So think to yourself, what do you find value in? What would you want to take when you are moving to a new place? Something that maybe reminds you of home, something that you really love. So a couple things that I would take. I would definitely say we live in a digital world, so everything's digital, but I value printed photos because you can hang them up. It reminds you of your family. So one thing I would take are some photos. Another thing that really reminds me of home that I would love when I went to somewhere new would be food from my family. So another thing I would bring with me would be my family recipes, so my recipe box. And let's see, another thing I would like to have to make new memories would be a camera. So that would be something else. And a journal. I could write about my experience going into a new place. And then what else would I want to take with me? Something that was from my family, so something that reminds me of home. So another thing I would want to take that would fit in my suitcase, of course, would be something, a gift from my family or something that reminds me of my family. Okay, so the second part of this activity is to write a label for an item that you would take with you. So this one, it says, next, imagine that 30 years after you move, you donate one item you brought to your new country to the local museum, so to the Putnam. Could you create an exhibit label up to 100 words that tells us more about it, its importance to you, and any family history? Use the items from the chart that we just talked about as inspiration on what you could write about in this area. So I'm actually going to choose to write about a gift from my family, so something that reminds me of my family and our home here in Iowa. So one thing I'm gonna write about is this piece of painted china. This is from my great grandmother who actually painted it. It was gifted to my mother, and it's been in our family for quite a while. So this is the item I'm gonna choose to write about. When you write your label, start with the title. So what is the actual item? When the curators are thinking about creating a label for an artifact here, they think about what the purpose is. Are they telling you more about the item and its use? Are they explaining this, maybe a story behind it? So think about the story behind your item and what you want to take with you. So I'll start mine.
This dish is hand painted, and it was actually painted in Buffalo, Iowa. So this dish is hand painted from Buffalo, Iowa. Were painted by my great grandmother, by Iris. Oh well. So she was my great grandmother. So the great grandmother of Miss Lakin. It's really symbolic, so it's decorative flowers and fragile material are symbolic of the strength, gentleness, and creative talent of the females throughout their family. And when you write yours, it is good to stay roughly around 100 words or less. This label is actually 97 words, so I got a little big on it. If you don't include who, maybe at the end of your label, if you'd like to include your name because you'll be the donor, the date that it was donated, so maybe the year. This one was given roughly in 1980 to my mother, and the location of where it's from. So that's another thing on how you could end your label.
This was really great to think about if I was going to a new place, a new country, where I've come from, so this place, just like people that have come here and settled here and made this their home, they probably had to think about what they valued and what they wanted for their future. So this was really a great activity for me to think about my family and how over time we've had different family members that have come here and settled. So I hope that you reflect on your the history of your item and why it would be important for you to take to a new place if you were moving. So thanks for joining me for this Arrivals Immerse activity today.